That's a little bit weird.
That's cool.
That's
That's the automatic intro.
Going through a little like vortex or something.
Yeah,
exactly. It was split in half. Did you see that?
No, yeah, not for me. Anyways, we are live on PrefectLive. So hey everybody, we're here. We've got Chris White, Quinn Tran, and Chris Reuter. I think today we'll do some answers, some Q&A questions. Maybe we'll show you some code. My first question though, Chris, you were telling me just before we started that you mirror your displays. You don't do an extended display. Is that true?
That is 100% true. I stand by it. And there was a question going around last week at our offsite about what's the smallest hill you die on, and I think maybe I found it.
yeah, I think that this might be it too. No, that's funny. That's definitely I think I used to mirror displays too back in the day, like '03, '04, if you will, mirror displays when I found extended displays. So, what about you, Quinn? She may be frozen too.
Oh, she's not frozen for me.
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Do you do mirror or extended?
Yeah, I often do a different screen, so never mirror.
Nice.
So
nice.
I'm all about portability, and so I will walk away from my monitor a lot. If I have like a big gap of no meetings, I like to like go sit somewhere else, and so I'll unplug my laptop, and it looks the same, which is really nice. I'm not like, oh whoa, a bunch of new windows or anything.
That is a great point. That's a really, really good point. I had not thought about that. So let's dive into it. I think relatively short stream today. Maybe we'll just budget a half an hour or so. Maybe we'll split it in half, like 15 answering questions, 15 maybe looking at some other stuff. How do you want to get started?
I mean, so one thing I kind of was thinking of using this time for is a little behind the scenes peek into just interacting with the Slack community. So I think if you're okay with it, I might just start with a share of our Slack community.
Yeah,
and
that sounds great.
We'll kind of take it from there. Maybe we'll fix a bug. Maybe we'll, talk about a new feature or something. So I guess, very conveniently, this is the first thing we see is Bill's post of 2.0 B9, which, I mean, we could definitely talk about this for a long time, but huge release of our 2.0 beta Python package. I think the biggest thing here is kind of this little bit code as workflows. So now whenever you call a task within a flow, by default, if you just call the task, it's going to run in the main process and it's going to return the Python object that your task returned. So it really will look and feel like Python when you're using just like the really, really standard basic feature set. And now one thing to call out though is that a lot of our users love parallelism and they love distributing things, especially on Dask, but also on Ray. And so to do that, we now consider that a slightly intermediate to advanced feature. And so as such, it requires one additional kind of line of code, basically. So instead of calling your task like a function, there's a method on it called .submit. And so you submit the task and that submits it to the task runner. And this allows you to kind of pick and choose also. A lot of our Dask users sometimes don't want to submit their work back out to Dask if it's just a little, piece of logic. And so now you can keep some things local and then push out others for parallelism.
Got it. And I love to play the layman, as you know. The change moving from, I guess, results to moving to bringing back the object itself. What were some, I think you got a pretty great story. You don't have to tell the whole thing, but just about making that decision. What are some pros and cons and why would we make that change?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll admit to everyone that I was very against this change. I didn't like it. I think, right, we're in a framework and it is okay that you get prefect objects back when you call other prefect objects. And that was my stance for a long time. However, we try really hard to always make our decisions based on principles. And so I ended up spending a lot of time with Andrew Brookins, one of our engineering managers. And we were just like talking through this. And I was like, here's why I'm against it. Andrew's like, yeah, I'm against it too. I don't like that, whatever. And we kind of broke it down. And without going through all of the details of how we arrived there, we basically arrived at this conclusion that I just said, which is that task runners and parallelism is an intermediate to advanced feature. And you've heard, I'm sure everyone who's seen me talk has heard me talk about incremental adoption, which we define as the amount you have to change your code or the new prefect concepts you need to learn always need to scale proportionally to how advanced your use case is. And so in this case, all the feedback we were getting from people that didn't have super advanced use cases, and they didn't like the fact they had to change their code, learn about prefect futures, which is ultimately this concurrency concept. And all of a sudden it started to make sense that from that perspective, it is a little bit much to throw at you. And so if we then make the task runner interface, the interface you have to explicitly opt into to get parallelism, then returning these native Python objects became a part of this incremental adoption. So literally by the end of the conversation, we had completely changed our mind and then went back to the team, made sure that everyone was on the same page about it. And here we are with B9.
Interesting. So did parallelism really played a really large part in this decision then, it sounds like?
Yeah, parallelism and also just concurrency. So like asynchronous execution, which is slightly different than parallelism.
Right. That makes sense.
So you mentioned that there are some principles that you review to make a decision whether you want this to be a feature for the new release or not. So can you mention some of the principles that you guys often review when consider a new feature?
Definitely. And so some of these are still we're still trying to figure out the short version. So incremental adoption is one. It's nice, quippy, easy to say. Being Pythonic is another one. So like the Zen of Python, I love the Zen of Python and all its glorious kind of ambiguity and also clarity. Another principle that we have for a lot of our features that a lot of our cloud users are familiar with is this hybrid architecture. So basically, deployed workflows that run through agents need to always operate on an outbound basis, so that you never have to change anything about your network except making sure that you can contact our API. It's really important for a lot of our enterprise customers. And another one too is, this one I don't have like a quippy saying for, but just making sure that our concepts are very well scoped, well defined, and that we have a bunch of very powerful but simple building blocks to build features on top of. So this is something we're working through right now with our deployments. So anyone who's used 2.0, you've probably set up a deployment so that you can run something on a schedule. There's various aspects of that are a little clunky and confusing right now and hard to debug. And so this kind of small, simple, well-scoped building blocks principle. It's kind of like a single responsibility principle, but I think it's actually more than that. So I don't really have like a headline for you, but we're kind of looking at deployments through that lens and finding that we can actually simplify a lot of what we're doing over there to make it just way simpler to reason about. And so that will most likely, variations of that will most likely show up in our next release next week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you want to maybe get in? I think there's maybe one unanswered question currently. We can maybe hop on before anyone else gets to it. And there's also right below that a really interesting. What I love about our community is Matt's question right below the unanswered one in Prefect Community is an entirely organic community discussion, which is really cool. But anyway, we may start with Sam's and then maybe look at the DBT one.
Yeah, I love it. I love it when I see that. As you can see, there's a lot of people in here. And so it's really cool when people start helping each other. And so, yeah, let's I don't know, I'm just going to start scrolling up and just giving some responses. And I think more importantly, maybe for anyone watching, just like talking through what I'm thinking about. And I'm not going to, call anyone out on that I'm commenting on, but say, okay, we've got Sam and he's facing an issue while registering flows. And here's the issue. So immediately, what I'm thinking is I don't have enough information. I just, registering flows in Prefect 1.0, he could be pushing to an S3 bucket. He could be building a Docker image and trying to push to an ECS registry. He could be building on top of a proprietary image inside an ECS registry, and so the build itself is failing, but I do not have enough information here to know. And so basically, that's what I'm going to say. And just kind of ask for some more clarity on what he's doing. And, this was earlier today. Who knows if he's still around or what time zone he's in, but.
This is all building up to me taking my shift, my 1 to 3 a.m. shift, East Coast time, support rotation. Hopefully there's no questions, although we do have a lot of overnight questions our time.
So just being caused by a push 2+3 Docker.
Awesome.
And then now sit back and wait. And of course, I'm not going to do that here. I mean, if he responds, we'll definitely get into it, but just scrolling on up. So this is an interesting question. This flow of flows. This is something that I'm going to continue to like emphasize and clarify with the community, maybe with some documentation or a blog post at some point. In Prefect 1.0, there is one and only one way to do this kind of flow of flows dependency pattern. And you register a bunch of flows, and then you register this orchestrator flow that like, you know, calls them all in order and this sort of thing. And that's how it works. That's the way you do it. And it kind of fits this whole philosophy that we had a lot in 1.0, which is like our API exists and you can build on top of it in powerful ways. And that's one of the ways that you can do so. In 2.0, though, things get way more interesting and a little bit more subtle. There's actually 2 different ways at the moment to do this, and we'll most likely have 3 different ways by the end of the year. So subflows, I want to emphasize, are not intended to replace the flow of flows pattern. So a subflow in 2.0 is the ability to have 2 flows defined in the same process, and you can call one inside the other. This gives you a lot of different benefits. You can track them as separate observable entities in the UI because they'll show up under different flows. And so the runs that were generated will show up under the different flows, and you can go look at them independently. That's one thing. You can switch the task runner that you're using between subflows. So if you want one of them to run on Dask, one of them to run on Ray, or some weird combination, you can do that. However, they are always using the same shared infrastructure. So it's a very kind of lightweight, I almost think of it as like a bookkeeping feature, where it just kind of lets you separate out your work into these different workflow names and track it as such. Flow of flows, though, in the language of 2.0 would be, I call it dependent deployments. So, right, flows are observable entities in 2.0. Deployments are server-side orchestrated workflows. And those are actually different in 2.0, which is really cool.
And so maybe, for example, if you wanted, I don't even know if we ever really see this example, but CPU versus GPU, talk about infrastructure. You could then define exactly the type of infrastructure you wanted to use. Whereas in 1.0, you're saying, no matter what type of runner you're using, essentially it's all going back to like for serverless, for example. It goes back to Fargate, or it goes back to just an instance that you've set up. Am I saying that correctly?
Basically. So in 1.0, though, each one of those workflows can run on very different infrastructure, but that's the only way. So you don't have the lightweight version of it, is I guess the distinction. So subflows is entirely new. And I don't think that has I don't think people have picked up on that as much as a 100% new pattern of putting workflows together. And then the flow of flows pattern can be replicated in 2.0 currently using the same kind of orchestrator flow thing, where you hit our API, you trigger the different deployments from the API, and you wait for them to complete. But the third way that I'm going to say end of year, that's, I don't know, don't quote me on that maybe.
Too late.
But quote me on it. We'd really love, because there's no reason this shouldn't be possible, to offer a GUI where you can put dependencies between deployments and then register that whole thing and schedule it. And so that's going to be the pinnacle of this feature, and that's probably going to be the way almost everyone uses it once it's out.
That's awesome. On flow of flows, by the way, go to 5:25 a.m. your time. There's a hilarious thread, since we're on this. I think that it would be funny just to highlight.
Which one of these?
From Choose, the Choose thread.
Okay, right here.
Yeah, sorry, 5:56. Wrong time.
Club 42, love it.
Yep.
So let's see. So he's wanting to know, or they're wanting to know if there's a downside to it, right? Large. Yeah, another way that I think about, oh, wow. I love that. Another thing too that I think is important with this flow of flows pattern is that it lets you also, so for example, maybe I have 3 workflows and I want these 2 to always run after the successful completion of this. However, because I defined them as workflows, presumably they could be run independently with just some specific parameter inputs. And so separating them out in this way always gives you that optionality that I could go trigger that one individually if I ever wanted to. But otherwise it will always run as a dependency of this, larger graph. And I think that is kind of another reason that you might do this.
Very cool. I just loved directed acyclic ghoul as the description for that huge DAG.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Very nice.
Oh yeah, Quinn.
Yeah, so in Tudor we have some flow. I wonder if you could walk through some benefits of using subflow versus using flow of flow.
So like a headline kind of reason?
Yeah.
I would say if you want to, okay, there's a few different things. Highly use case dependent. A subflow allows you to inject logic in the middle of another workflow, right? Like the workflow runs some tasks, then it runs an entire flow, then it runs some more tasks. That is 100% not possible with the larger flow of flows pattern, right? Because the workflow has to complete before it can pass anything off to the next one. So that is one reason you might choose subflows. Another thing is that if your subflow you never actually want to run on a schedule or trigger independently, then using the subflow, kind of like I was saying before, becomes just a really convenient way to bookkeep that whole chunk of logic in the UI. So you can filter for it, you can look at it, based on tag, and it's purely about the structure in the UI. And that's another reason you might just do that. Maybe it's a common shared piece of logic that you use across lots of different workflows. So you want to track what version are you running and that sort of thing. So yeah, friendly reminder to everyone, tasks and flows both have versions that you can provide so that you can track these over time. But if you ever have a workflow that you do intend to put on its own schedule or run independently, then I would start to look towards that flow of flow pattern, because otherwise I think you're just duplicating effort. So yeah, subflows I think almost entirely for bookkeeping and shared common logic between workflows more than anything else.
Makes sense. Yeah. For me, using subflow is very useful for organizing into different logic. For example, I might have different flows for development and different flows for production. Then I might just group all the flow for developments in my machine learning project, such as processing data, chaining data, and then the other one is to create an app for another flow. So now I can organize it like flows inside another flow, and I can set the deployment for, let's say, the development flow to run every day, which I found very useful.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and I think at some point, once we're in general availability, this would be a great thing for us to write some guides around, so that we, actually suggest some best practices of when to use a subflow, when not to use a subflow, etc.
We have actually an interesting question. This one's in the Club 42 channel, but I can read it to you, or you're welcome to read it. But it's from Billy McMonigal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like 2.0 is moving away from GraphQL. And wondering if there's any reasoning or context you're able to share.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is great for the Twitch. So, there's a few different reasons. Let me start with the user-facing reason that was important to us, and then I'll tell you more about kind of the back-end reasoning. So I think one thing we learned, a lot of our users, at least a year ago, were not very familiar with GraphQL. So that was just yet another thing they had to learn. that was, became a little frustrating. A lot of people asked for a REST API. And building them both kind of in parallel is honestly just used a bunch of different tooling, and it's just kind of a mess. Another thing is for Prefect Server specifically, because we chose to use GraphQL, that is why Prefect Server is so heavy, because we needed all of this query schema off of the database. And we could have built our own custom query resolver, but that's a whole mess. We actually did do that at one point, but it's a lot to maintain. So that's what Hasura does. Hasura auto exposes the schema off of the database tables. And then secondly, for our business logic, we had all of our mutations defined in Python code. That's the GraphQL part of Prefect Server, like the GraphQL service. And lastly, those are two separate GraphQL schemas, so we had to stitch them together. And once again, just kind of a build versus buy type of question. It was much easier to use Apollo to do that. So Apollo merges those two schemas into one universal schema that becomes the API. But now you have this massive thing of like a node server, Hasura, which I don't even remember what language Hasura is written in, this Python web server, and a database sitting behind it all. And so what we did was we put that all into a Docker Compose file or a Helm chart, but it's heavy. It's really heavy. Anyone who spun up Prefect Server knows how much just weight it carries.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of those reasons, moving to REST allowed us to do all of the really cool stuff we did with Orion, such as when you run a workflow, the moment you install 2.0, it is already persisting to a database in the background. And that's all possible, long story short, because we moved to a REST API. If we had done it with GraphQL, it would have just been a huge mess of code. There is another reason, though, that's a lot more selfish. That just my 2 cents. There's a really, I usually don't recommend Hacker News threads, but there is one on GraphQL that resonated with me so hard whenever I was making this decision. And GraphQL is a pain to manage in the backend when you're exposing it at high volume to a large number of different users. And so if you're using GraphQL internally to make, front end development of an application quicker, I think it makes a lot of sense because it's a very tightly scoped set of things and request volume that you're going to get. But at our scale, we were having people make these huge nested queries with joins and going over hundreds of thousands of rows of data. And it became really hard to manage all of the different indices that we had to fine tune in our database. And so
interesting.
The database management side of it became really hard. And so then we had to start cutting off certain types of queries that would frustrate certain groups of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
got it. Really interesting. I appreciate you being open to answering that live on stream. I know a lot of the different companies, people would be like, what? So I really appreciate it. I actually was taking some notes. That's a
great question.
And I'll post that, maybe even in the public community, just for anyone watching. So really interesting. Sorry, I wanted to read that one out, but we can go back to any interesting ones. And I know you're looking for unanswered ones. I'd love to check out this DBT thread, by the way, if you right above my post.
Yeah, let's check it out. So let's see, what do we have? We've got how do you deal with dependencies? And now it's unclear whether we're talking 1 or 2.0, but that's okay. Looks like talking 1.0 is, with flow. So this is all 1.0. So yeah, in 1.0, you can be very declarative about your dependencies, which it looks like is exactly what Billy is suggesting. Let's see. Exactly. Just like this upstream task keyword argument allows you to specify a dependency that doesn't maybe share any data or state or anything like that, but just make sure that one thing runs after the other. And then all of that failure stuff, you can definitely handle. Now there is one. Yeah, a lot of this, let's see. I mean, honestly, this is interesting. A lot of this, I feel like leaves Prefect's, purview in a really good way, though. This is just, and I think one of the I mean, honestly, challenges, frankly, of Prefect is that we do try to design everything from really basic primitives. And so it is kind of infinitely flexible in a certain sense. And so when people ask us for best practices, we always say, well, it depends on the use case.
Right.
And this is, I think, a really good example of that. It's someone who's ultimately like, yeah, Prefect can do the thing. We can manage a bunch of DBT models, kind of any number that you want. Should they be tasks? Should they be flows? Should this person, right? Is it a one-to-one mapping of a flow to a model? These are questions that really depend on kind of what you're hoping Prefect is doing for you. Is Prefect retrying? Okay, maybe a task is better. Is Prefect giving you a way to trigger these independently and just track over time? You know, there's all sorts of questions like that. You need different infrastructure for each of them.
Well, it's interesting that this comes down to a constraint that it appears they have, which is Redshift cluster. Well, they don't want to auto scale it, so they're stuck with a constrained amount of resources, and they're trying to figure out how to make sure their flows run based on that constraint. And a question from Anna. I'm gonna try to bring it up, show on stream. So when and when not to use prefect.context.
Oh, so for 1.0, I mean, more often than not, I would say don't use it. I think the only times to really use prefect.context are when you want to use some bit of prefect metadata to template something you're doing. So for example, maybe you're writing some SQL and you want to know the task run that is generating that SQL. So you throw in maybe as a like a SQL annotation or whatever system you're using, that task run ID, which is inside of context. That's a great use case of context. It's a read-only thing. You can inject your own stuff into context through environment variables, but at that point, it's not clear to me what you're gaining by using context as opposed to just referencing the environment variable directly. That feels much more explicit to me and portable. So my general take is use it only for reading and only for, you know, injecting prefect metadata into other places. Like maybe it's a lineage tool or something that you're doing things with.
Cool.
Yeah. Another thing too, by the way, with resource constrained situations is concurrency limiting. And in 2.0, concurrency limiting is way, way, way nicer. You can do it by tag on all of your tasks if you choose to do things task by task basis, or you can limit concurrency of a work queue. So that's how much work gets released to an agent. And so once again, this is one of the things I think is the coolest thing about Prefect 2.0. You don't have to use agents. You can manage and operationalize your workflows entirely yourself by calling them and anywhere, however you want. For example, using Lambda, you don't have to do this whole song and dance of a file lands in a bucket. You trigger a Lambda that hits our API that causes another thing to run. You can just put your workflow code directly into that Lambda, have it run, and you are done. That will be observed and tracked by Prefect. So task concurrency, you can access in that way from any place that you call a flow with the right task tags. And then work queue concurrency is for when you actually have full deployments and you just don't want too many of a similar type to be running at the same time. So you just put a concurrency limit on your work queue.
That's really cool. That's an awesome functionality. I've seen, I think you know that I come from the data warehouse side, and so many times our customers would have issues with our data warehouse, and it was ultimately, you don't want to say this to them, but their fault, because you're given, at the time I was working with physical on-prem appliances, and you have a certain number of cores, a certain amount of memory, a certain amount of storage, and that's it. And when you're throwing these crazy things at it that are 100x times what you normally would and expecting the same results. This is more of a rant than anything, but you know what I mean? It's exactly the same thing. So I think enabling people and maybe teaching them about the need for some kind of just like given constraints, some sort of limiting is just really helpful. Although it won't always solve the problem.
I mean, I think that's what's really interesting about the space that Prefect works in, and why orchestration tools are so important is like, okay, you just described one way in which concurrency isn't obvious in this system. This Redshift cluster thing is another way. Number of database connections, something's allowed to open is another way. There's all these ways, and each tool does offer you a way to handle it, right? you're dealing with database connections, you can use like PG Bouncer, some load balancing thing. I'm sure the data warehouse technology you're using had some way to like push things back and everything. But if you use a tool like Prefect, the problem, it becomes this universal language of just like putting things in the right queues and throwing a limit on each queue, and now you're done.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what they're all talking to and what you have to learn to do all that stuff. And so like having those features in your glue is just really helpful and convenient.
Yep. Yep. Do you want to do any more questions, or do you want to move to code? I'm down for either.
I could go either way. It looks like there's not too many more. I think Sam's probably not around for right now. Actually, let's check on. I like messing with the UI. So let's see. I've been trying to do some UI work on 2.0 also, like really small stuff. But okay, that's not. Haven't checked this channel actually in a while. Oh, you know what? I really do not know Helm very well. And so I'm going to steer clear of that question in case it gets too in the weeds.
And an OpenShift is, we don't see that very often at all.
No,
sure.
yeah. So that's a whole other.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of customers, at least I know of in cloud, that run an OpenShift, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But so yeah, if we switch to code, I guess, Chris, is there anything in particular? Like, there's a lot of different things, you know, we could do there. But
yeah, I think like Quinn was saying before, anything new that we may in B8 or B9 that we may have released. I know that most of the B8 stuff I think was a collaborative release, right? So that was like a lot of cloud UI specific stuff, and obviously not code related. I think you could demonstrate the results change, like what task returns, like you were talking about.
Let me. So I have an idea. I'm going to share. I guess I am going to just go entire screen.
Cool.
And let's see. So you can see yourselves, right?
Now we can't. That's good now.
So okay, cool.
All right.
So I'm on the main branch of Orion, but this is basically like what was just released.
And give us a zoom, like a 1 or 2 times zoom on Perfect.
How's that?
It's pretty decent.
So what I'm gonna do, let's see.
Maybe a little more. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that?
A little more in, like a zoom. I know it's gonna feel huge.
Is that good?
One more.
Woo!
it's blowing him away.
How is this though?
It's good.
Okay, cool. So what I'm gonna do, I think let's see.
Here, we'll try. I think that will help actually a little bit. There we go. I switched the orientation. Perfect.
I think that's the right command. So I'm just updating all my UI stuff. I want to show people a little bit about blocks. I think they're our most interesting but poorly understood feature that we're building in 2.0.
Yeah, and as you're doing this, I'd love if you talk about the future, right? Like what this empowers us to do as much as you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So blocks are okay. Let's see. How might we? I'm going to do prefect dev build UI. So everything I'm doing for everyone watching is just this is all development stuff. So no user has to do all of these things, right? We package up the UI into our Python package for you. But since I am working in the code base a lot, I have to do all these things. So blocks, in an interesting way, blocks are nothing more than like really powerful secrets. So secrets from Prefect Cloud 1.0. But the reason that they're powerful is so they're shared pieces of configuration that you might be using across different workflows. So, right, secrets are just an obvious example. You might have some credentials that you're using in multiple workflows. You can store those in a block securely and then reference it in your code. But you can do a lot more. It doesn't have to be secret values. It could be common groupings of parameters or some configuration that you use for a task runner or something like that. And putting them in a block allows you to kind of separate that config away from your code so that your code becomes very, very portable, maybe through different environments, through different changes that you just have to make if you're rotating these configs for any reason. And blocks just give you a way to do that. But in addition, this configuration, we know like what block it is based on well, hopefully you'll understand this a little bit better in a moment. And so we can also track every time it gets used, how it's used. And so it adds in this really interesting observability layer that secrets never had. So it's not just about auditing its use, but actually discovering interesting patterns in the use.
I did not think about that. And so like creating like I have thought about a one-to-one relationship with like different vendor tools and blocks, right? So like as I've been thinking about this leading up to now, but let's say you wanted to monitor Snowflake usage in some way, like some logical way that you create using blocks, you can do that theoretically.
Yes, exactly.
Mind blown.
And so I deleted my database right before this, and so I think I'm getting an issue because of that. Let's see if I can. And hopefully, if my environment is not too corrupted, I can show you something. I'm just going to test that this runs.
Well, he does that. Quinn, have you watched season 4 of Stranger Things?
No, I really want to. I watched all the previous season. So
I have not, but I keep seeing Vecna memes, and now I'm confused, but I'm a little too scared to ask because it's like a little too late, I think.
Vecna is the bad.
Right. I mean, I context clued that, but anything else?
Chris, one thing I can do is to show my screen with just the UI, and you can go through.
Yeah, go for it. That'd be great. I could also, I guess, use Cloud. I didn't think about that, but
yeah, that's sure.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe let's try Cloud. Actually, that could be fun. So I'm gonna do a new. So we're gonna go to beta.prefect.io. Sign in with Google. Yeah, great idea. Okay, so I'm gonna go to just this shared workspace. This is just like a dummy workspace. There's nothing really particularly interesting in here. But let's go to these blocks. So no blocks currently. So let's click create block. So this is, we're going to add a lot more kind of interesting, like these Slack logos and things, but all of these are just different types of shared configuration that you might want to use. So it could be something as, intense as connection credentials to Azure Blob Storage, or it could be something as simple as a date time. So this replaces Prefect Cloud secrets. This replaces Prefect Cloud's KV store. And like I said before, this also enables this new kind of tracking of config across workflows. And so let's do Twitch test. So I'm just gonna, let's see. Let's just do something simple like this. So, not very interesting. I put the value 42 into this block called Twitch test. Now, the other thing that I want to do is, I'm not sure, prefect profile list. Let's do, okay, it looks like I don't have a profile for this. So let me, create an API key really quickly. Name Twitch test. I'm gonna expire this on Friday, but I'll probably delete it before then just because you're about to see it. Okay. So I'm gonna go, I always just edit these directly, which I realize is probably not the right. This is not what I recommend to users, but Prefect API key. And then I think I do need to change this to the workflow that I was just in, which is, yeah.
I love this platform that we're using because you can highlight Twitch chat on the platform. So I just highlighted, it's showing over your screen a little bit, says, why is Chris using Jeremiah's workspace?
Because I was invited
no,
to.
I know, exactly.
So let's see if I did this correctly. I did it a little quickly, but okay. So prefect profile use Twitch. Cool. And so here, just once again, I just love emphasizing this. So prefect import flow. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just want to prove a point. What did I do wrong? Did I get the wrong B? Okay, clearly I have something borked in my environment. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able, I think, to do the. So first off, I was going to run that and it's going to show up here once my environment is correct. And did that whole beta prefect account workspace, that looks right. Maybe my API key is messed up. Okay, so the main thing that I was going to say, though, is that what you can do with these blocks and how you can reference them, and obviously this is not gonna work. Let's see if it's in the top level. It is not. So let's see, blocks dot, I think it's system maybe. Yeah, here we go. So this JSON block has a load method. And this load method, you give it a name, which in this case would have been Twitch test. I mean, let's try it, but I have a feeling it's not going to work because something's wrong. But yeah, so it's not working because my API key is messed up. But I think you get the idea, right? When I load this block, it goes through all of the kind of type validation and loads whatever this configuration is, the stored server side. And now my workflow code only has this line. And I can entirely in the UI go like change everything about whatever this line is returning.
That's amazing. So basically in the UI, set something, right? And that can be a credential. And then you can use that in code, right? So set it once and it can be shared and then a group of people can use it in code.
Exactly. And then once again, just to kind of emphasize that the future of blocks is, sorry, I'm going to in the screen share real quick, is that different blocks have different methods on them. So they have, it's represented as capabilities in the UI. And so like an S3 block, for example, can read and write from a bucket. And the thing is, we can then know that set of credentials was used to read from a bucket, and we can track that. That's and now awesome. You can kind of see, like on a screen that does not yet exist, all the different ways that block is being used, the last time it was used, etc. And yeah, and then there's a lot of other really cool things we can do. I'll just throw out there. If we also had a way to view it from the, so this is showing it from the credentials to what it's talking to kind of lens, but we could flip that and say the bucket itself maybe has a representation in Prefect. Right. And then you can ask what all is talking to this bucket, which is another interesting question.
That's really cool. And then to beyond like an S3 bucket, that it could be Looker looks, it could be DBT models, it could be Snowflake schemas and databases and tables, right?
Totally. Or it could be your Kubernetes cluster that you love to run your workflows in. And maybe there's going to be a way that you can send us all the things happening in that cluster so that you can see whenever something starts going wrong with your workflow that maybe the pod was evicted, and you can see that in Prefix UI.
That's interesting. And maybe then you can figure out what other things that you don't even explicitly declare in Prefect are impacting your like workflow reliability. Oh, exactly. I see where you're taking us. Okay, it's really, really cool, really interesting idea. Can't wait to see where it goes. In the case of the people in Slack today, it can look at your Redshift cluster. You can see the data scientists that are running the wacky queries, right? Okay, interesting.
Exactly.
All right, cool. Well, this has been really awesome. Appreciate you coming on and kind of showing us the process for handling, just chat questions, the process for how you're thinking about product development. This is a very wide spectrum that you have, of course. And I'll bring up here, you can see what I was talking about. This evil smile. I love this platform. But I definitely see where you're going with it. And I think everyone is super, super excited. Anything else, Chris or Quinn?
Nothing from me. Thanks for having me on for kind of a feeling, just hang out in conversation.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Cool. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you guys for watching PrefectLive.
Help too.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.